and we're going to start with a webinar in behalf of the Dementia Society of Brantford County. Welcome to our webinar. So, Tara, I think we can start anytime now.
Sounds good. Thank you, Armin. I want to thank you for getting everything queued up and ready to go here, and thank the Dementia Society for inviting me to connect with the caregivers in some of your programs today. So just a little bit about me. I'm a social worker by training, and I facilitate mindfulness groups in the community, sometimes with healthcare providers, sometimes with families, across sectors as well. So in hospital, hospices, and long-term care. And I'm happy to have the opportunity to discuss mindfulness today with the group here. So without knowing who has any experience with mindfulness and who this is new for, we're just going to sort of do a basic discussion about mindfulness. And I'm excited to do a few practices. I'm hoping everybody's feeling willing to engage in some practices today. So thank you all for being here. As you can see, that my role is with the Champlain Hospice Palliative Care Program. I'm the program manager there. And this is our why statement that we've been working on, or that we've recently come up with. So it's to engage people in palliative care so that they are seen, supported, and connected. And when we talk about palliative care, what we're really talking about is any care. It's a palliative approach that increases quality of life for individuals who are living with chronic illnesses and their support people. So for us, palliative care isn't synonymous, isn't the same as end of life care. Palliative care really is quality of life care that could start at any time during a disease trajectory. So what I'm hoping that we're going to get from what I'm hoping we're going to cover here today are a few things. So the first being recognizing, attending, and responding to needs that come up, your needs. The second is having an understanding of mindfulness and how it can help increase overall well-being. And the third is experiencing some mindfulness practices and reflecting. So I'm really hoping that you feel open and willing to sharing some of your experiences that you have here today. So I start with this. Courage starts with showing up and letting ourselves be seen. So this is a quote by Brené Brown, who's a social worker, and she's very well known for her research in vulnerability. And she talks about courage as being a heart word, heart. So cur is the Latin word for heart. So in the earliest forms, courage really meant speaking one's mind by telling all of one's heart. So what I'm hoping here today is that we sort of access this everyday courage that Brené Brown talks about, which is allowing our hearts to connect with where we're at and things that might be going on. And, you know, we all know that these are difficult days. In addition to the caregiving responsibilities, I think all of you on the line will have, where things are being complicated by and compounded by the coronavirus and all of the losses that go along with that. So the losses of our normal contacts and our freedom and life as we generally know it. So things are definitely more complicated now. So if we could be courageous enough to sort of being willing to touch on those things and tap into those things as we go along, as much as it is comfortable. We don't want to get ourselves into a place where we're feeling so much that we can't contain how we're doing, but enough to sort of notice what's coming up for us. So I start with this permission slip. So if you could just take a couple of seconds to consider, what do you need right now to give yourself permission to do, to feel, or to not do, to show up for this session? So it could be something like putting aside things that, you know, distractions that might be coming to you, either, you know, things on your to-do list or other distractions, or is your permission to allow yourself to sort of connect with what's really happening with you. So just taking a couple of seconds now to think, what do you need to really be here in this moment to engage in this session wholly? Okay, so once we sort of have that in our minds, if we could allow it sort of to rest there, and if you need to come back to it as we go along, just feeling free to come back to reminding yourself what you need right now to be here. So we're going to start with just a short grounding exercise. It's really an arrival exercise, so that we're all here together in this moment. So what I would ask is if you could just find yourself in a comfortable position. You could keep your eyes open or close them if you prefer. I tend to close my eyes, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So just as best you can, finding yourself in a comfortable position wherever you're seated. Just beginning to notice the physical sensation of your feet on the ground. Just noticing the points of contact that your feet are making with the ground beneath you. Perhaps feeling the backs of your legs on the chair. Having your spine straight without being stiff. Your head stacked above your shoulders. Allowing your shoulders to relax. And just noticing the physical sensations of your body sitting here. Perhaps noticing points of tension. Spots that feel relaxed. Just tuning in to what's here for you in your body. And as best we can, not wishing for things to be different than they are. Just noticing what's here and allowing things to be exactly as they are. And just allowing the body to breathe itself, not changing your breathing in any way. Just breathing in and breathing out naturally at a rhythm that's comfortable for you. And as we go through this session today, just doing so with a general idea of allowing things to be as they are and not judging them. Just approaching things with curiosity. And with the intention of looking after yourself. And just taking a couple of final breaths here before we open our eyes if our eyes are closed. And starting to move your hands and feet and opening your eyes. And bringing our awareness back to this present moment where we are. So that was just a short arrival practice. It's leaving things behind us that we may have brought into this moment, things that happened earlier in the day, or possibly thoughts we might have about all the other things that need to get done today, but just arriving here so we can all be here in the moment together. So when I talk about mindfulness, this is a definition by John Kabat-Zinn, who founded the MBSR, the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Program. So this is the one that I generally use and like. So it's mindfulness means paying attention on purpose in a particular way, moment by moment, non-judgmentally. We know that mindfulness practices, there's been a lot of research done and evidence to show that mindfulness practices help caregivers cope with stress, allow people to connect with themselves and with others, heighten our ability to practice self-compassion, and mindfulness overall can increase quality of life. Some of the skills in mindfulness that are listed here, the first would be noticing and awareness. So as we become a little more comfortable with mindfulness, we start to see that we are aware of things that we may not have been aware of before. So we tend to go through our lives quite often on autopilot. So we might go for a walk and we get from point A to point B, but we might not notice all the things that are around us, the smells and the sounds. And as we begin to build our noticing and our awareness, we start to see things differently. We are able to see options that we may not have seen before. When we're on autopilot, we're very rigid in our thinking and we tend to react. So the awareness helps us build flexibility. Another skill in mindfulness is the process of being able to let go rather than clinging. So clinging is generally when we attach ourselves to a particular outcome. So very often in situations, we have an idea of how we'd like things to turn out. The process of letting go allows us to be with what is, which is also the same as, or very similar to allowing versus resistance. So in allowing, we're being with what we find. So we don't need things to be different. We're allowing things to be as they are. Whereas resistance, we know that when we have resistance to something, the pain that we feel and the resistance that we have to things can create suffering. So as we build our skills of mindfulness, we might notice that we're able to respond to situations instead of reacting to situations. Mindfulness tends to build in a space between a stimulus and a response. So when something happens, we very often just react quickly based on habits, based on our perceptions. But when we become more accustomed to thinking about things mindfully, noticing what's coming up for us, it gives us the chance to build in different responses. It also leads to us being able to live in the present moment. So human beings are complex, and we tend to create a lot of stories in our heads. So in the absence of knowing, we create truth. So we can live in a story that isn't actually fact. It's what we believe or what we think, but it may not be, it's often not truth. And we get caught up in regrets and we get caught up in planning for our future. So mindfulness allows us to really be in the present moment, this moment, the next moment, each moment as it arises. This is Shinzen Young. And the reason I show this is because I find it to be interesting, and I think it's something worth considering, and I'm always open to other people's thoughts on this. But Shinzen Young is an American meditation teacher. He was ordained as a monk in Japan, excuse me, and he often works with neuroscientists and uses mathematics to illustrate meditation concepts. So this is one of Shinzen Young's formulas. So it's S equals P times R, which is suffering, equals pain times resistance. So Shinzen Young would say that in life, pain is inevitable. We are going to experience pain, but suffering is optional. So he says that our suffering is created by resisting the pain as opposed to allowing for ourselves to feel pain. And I find that to be interesting. We can't eliminate pain from the planet, but we can possibly, we can definitely work on how do we respond in a way that we can limit our suffering. So I came across this quote these quotes that by Brandon Lynn Tebow, who is a life coach. And what she has to say about pain is that pain is a vibration, suffering is an interpretation, pain is an experience, suffering is the thought that the experience shouldn't be there, and pain is a fact of life, suffering is a choice. So again, I don't have the answers, but I put it out there for us to think about. If our resisting our pain instead of sort of allowing it, embracing it, and being curious about it creates additional suffering that maybe we don't need to experience. Mindfulness and integration. So this is some of the work of Dan Siegel, who's a psychiatrist. And Dan Siegel is the first person that I'm aware of anyway, who's tried to define what mind is. So Dan Siegel would say that mind, I think I'll go back and say, I think most people think of mind as our brains, right? And the way we think. Dan Siegel has a different definition. And he would say that mind is an embodied and a relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information. So he would say that we have energy and information that travels throughout our bodies. And it's how we monitor and manage that flow of information and how we put it out into the world, which is the relational part. So when he talks about mindfulness and integration, he talks about we have 3 centers of knowing. We don't just know things from our enskulled brain. We have 3 centers of knowing, which would be the brain, our heart, and our gut. So he says if we could take information from these 3 centers, and in this slide, you'll see that when we are in our enskulled brain and we intellectualize things, which is something that we do a lot of in North America, we tend to get caught in this loop of thinking that we could problem solve and think our way out of situations. And that's how we work generally, is just with our brain and our thoughts. When we're tapping into our heart, we're tapping into our emotions, and we might feel things like this is really difficult or this is really wonderful, but we're really noticing what's going on with our emotions and our heart. And then our gut sensations, we might notice things like it's difficult to breathe, or we might notice that we're clenching our fists, or our jaws are tight, but we're starting to use our body, sense into our body what we're experiencing. And then integration, he says that we could pull information from each of these different areas to help inform our responses. So there's no right or wrong here. And I just think it's an interesting exercise for people to start to think, how do you generally get information and what leads your responses? Are you mostly thinking with your enskulled brain, or is it mostly coming from your heart or your gut? Or, to start to play around with that, how can you integrate information coming from different sources to lead to a more of an integrated response, or equanimity, the having a sense of equanimity. So I think often when we're talking about illness and end of life, when you're caring for people who aren't well, there are a lot of different things happening at once. So it could be that there are moments of great joy, but also moments of difficulty and heartbreak and suffering. So the equanimity is being able to hold those things together, that both are present and that they can coexist, which is quite common when we're looking after people who aren't well, that there's some of both and allowing them to exist at the same time. I'm going to show just a short video. It's actually, it's an illustrated poem. So the poem is by the 16th century poet Rumi. And the poem is called The Guest House. It's, I like this because it's just a nice way of seeing it instead of me reading it. So it's just a couple of moments long here. Oh, maybe, let's see if I could get that working properly. There we go.
A mindful moment. So this is a poem by the poet Rumi, and it is entitled The Guest House. I hope you enjoy it. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. This has been a mindful moment.
So the reason I share that is because it's a poem about emotions. The guests are different emotions. And in the work I do, it's very often connecting with people as they learn to connect with their different emotions. And I think it's become quite common as a coping strategy to either numb out or bottle up emotions. So I think, we often hear that people, that use different strategies to avoid thinking about what's coming up for them, emotions that they find difficult to be with. So we have both positive and negative, and I hesitate to use positive and negative. We have emotions that feel good to feel, and then we have emotions that are sometimes quite difficult. But in society, there's this tendency to not want to feel things that are hard to feel. There's a general belief that we should feel good and happy all the time. But the truth is that we have this full range of emotions, and we're going to feel all these different things. So when we talk about integration, there's a lot of thought, thinking that people seem to be quite comfortable with. Our body reactions happen regardless of whether we want them or not. We may or may not be aware of them, but they're happening. I tend to like to focus on the work I do with emotions, because I think that's an area that a lot of people are uncomfortable with. But as we're feeling courageous and vulnerable, and we can connect with one another and talk about these things, that there's the opportunity for healing and for wellness. So this is Plutchik's flower. And as you can see, there are lots of different words on it. So it's the 8 primary emotions that are shown not on the inner circle, but in the first circle outside of the inner circle. So those are the 8 primary emotions. If we look at the inner circle, it's the same emotions intensified. And then as we look at each petal of the flower, it's the same emotion with less intensity. So I just happen to like this wheel, this particular flower. And sometimes in workshops, it's helpful for people. If you don't have a lot of practice and you're not comfortable talking about your emotions, sometimes it's really helpful to have something like this in front of you that lists emotions that could help you put a name on things that you may not have been thinking about. So our emotions really are just labels for things that we're feeling in our bodies. They're words that we've come up with that enable us to talk to other people about what we might be feeling. And emotions move through us. We know that we don't feel the same way all the time. There might be a moment when we're feeling sad, but if we pay attention to what sad is, we'll see it come and go. It won't stay. And the same thing with happy or frustrated or any other emotion. Things tend to come and go. But sometimes things will get stuck. Sometimes we get stuck in emotions that are challenging. And it's really important to work with that and to be patient and non-judgmental and accept that we are where we are in that moment, and not to be hard on ourselves. So the other thing I just want to say about emotions before we move on is that I sometimes work with people, and we often discuss this little saying, which is name it to tame it. So as part of mindfulness and noticing, you might notice that your hands are feeling tight and your jaw is tight, and all these sensations in your body might lead you to realize that, what you're feeling is anger. But if you can name it, say, I feel so angry right now, it's amazing how quickly you could start to see the feelings subside. When you're able to name it and acknowledge it, it gives you the opportunity to see it pass, which feelings always do. So this brings me to Frank Ostaseski. I was hoping to share this with you a little bit today because Frank Ostaseski, he started Zen Hospice in San Francisco, and he's been at the bedside of many people who have died. And he has some great lessons in this particular book. He has 5 invitations that he'd like to share about discovering what death could teach us about living fully. And his 5 invitations are really directly related to mindfulness. So I thought it might be interesting to share some of that here today. So Frank's first invitation is don't wait. So Frank says, instead of pinning our hopes on the future, we need to focus on the present and be grateful for what we have in front of us right now. So again, that's bringing ourselves to the present moment. We know if we're spending a lot of time ruminating about things that have happened in the past, it increases our depression. It can increase the experience of depression. If we spend a lot of time worrying about the future, it can lead to feelings of anxiety. But the more we can be focused in the present moment, it can help us sort of settle into what we could do right now. The second invitation is welcome everything, push nothing away. So Frank says we don't have to like everything that's arising in any given moment. It's not our job to approve or disapprove what's happening. But if we could suspend our judgment and just be open to whatever it is that's coming up, we could turn it over in different ways. We could explore our reactions to it. We could investigate it and just be curious about what's coming up. Third, Frank says to bring our whole self to every experience. So he shares that we all have things about ourselves that we like and things that we find difficult, parts that we struggle with. But Frank says to be whole, to see ourselves as whole people, we need to include, we need to accept and connect with all parts of ourselves. So wholeness doesn't mean being perfect. It just means that no part is left out. Fourth, Frank says, find a place in the middle of things. So our lives are busy. There are many demands on our time. And there's an inclination to think, oh, I'll take care of something later. I'll do something later when I get this done, when I get the next thing done. But Frank says that there's always a place available within us. It's a choice. We could always bring our attention to the present moment. We could always find moments of calmness, even in the middle of chaos. So this is something that I really like to work with in terms of mindfulness, that our mindfulness doesn't have to be a sitting 40-minute practice every day where you go find a quiet spot and sit on a cushion. We could always find a quiet place in the middle of things. So, if it's, these days we're not leaving our homes much, we're not going far, but it could be just finding a quiet spot in a corner. It could be stepping outside to your front step. But just finding a place in the middle of things. So let's give it a shot. What we'll do a short practice that really could be done anywhere at any time. When you start to notice that you're feeling triggered or things are coming up that are difficult. So again, we'll just take a few moments, finding yourself in a comfortable position, eyes open or eyes closed, whatever feels right to you. Having your hands comfortably on your lap, palms up, palms down, whatever works. Again, just noticing your feet on the ground, your body sitting here in a dignified posture. So that's with your spine straight, but doesn't have to be stiff, your head above your shoulders. Just sitting here and bringing your awareness to your breath. So not looking to change your breath in any way. Just allowing your breath to breathe itself. But noticing when you're breathing in and noticing you're breathing out. And just following the journey of your breath as it enters and exits your body. You may begin to notice where the breath is most prominent for you. So it could be the cool air at as you breathe in through your nostrils. It could be the rise and fall of your chest. Or maybe the expansion and contraction of your belly. And there's no right or wrong. It's just noticing where the breath is most prominent for you. Breathing in, just knowing you're breathing in. And breathing out, just knowing you're breathing out. And when your mind begins to wander, that's okay. Our minds are built to wander. Perhaps noticing where it's wandered off to, if you've been distracted by sounds or thoughts. Maybe you're planning or organizing or thinking about what needs to be done later. And that's okay. There's no judging yourself or being harsh on yourself, just noticing that that's what's happened. The practice really is in noticing what's going on. So notice you've wandered off, and then as best you can, gently reminding yourself to focus on breathing, the physical sensations of breathing once again. And each time your mind wanders off, just remembering that the breath is an anchor that you could always come back to. Allowing yourself to be in the present moment, bringing your breath to each passing breath in this moment, and in this moment, and in this moment. And when you're ready, just beginning to move your fingers and your toes, rotating your hands, your feet. If your eyes are closed, opening your eyes. And coming back into this moment. So that was finding a place in the middle of things. We literally stopped what we were doing and just took a moment to pause and to notice what was coming up for us. And going back to Frank, Frank's final invitation in his book, The 5 Invitations, is cultivate a don't know mind. So what Frank means by this is not about being ignorant. It's really about curiosity and wonder. So approaching things with newness, with curiosity, with childlike eyes, and opening our hearts to experiences. So instead of feeling like, oh, I've done this a million times, or I've seen this, or I know what this is, having a don't know mind, seeing it with fresh eyes, and perhaps getting something different out of it that we've never seen or felt before. So I share these with you because I think these are ways that, you know, we could shift our perception. We could be more present in our days and our experiences. And this might come naturally for some people and it might be more difficult, but the intention really is to try to reflect and to notice and see if this changes the way that you feel about experiences that you might be having on a day-to-day basis. I wanted to take a few moments here. We don't have that much time left, but I just want to talk a little bit about self-compassion. The literature in self-compassion, the research has shown that self-compassion is linked to well-being. So it increases life satisfaction, happiness, optimism, connectedness, curiosity, gratitude, and caring, and generally makes us more resilient. So in the compassion literature, Krista Neff and Christopher Germer have done quite a bit of work in this area. And they say that there are 3 elements to self-compassion. The first is self-kindness. The second is common humanity, and the third is mindfulness. So we've already spent quite a bit of time today talking about what mindfulness is. Self-kindness really is being kind to yourself in a way that you would be kind to your best friend. And I think in my experience, what I've seen is many caregivers are really kind and thoughtful and generous to other people, the people they look after, but can be hard on themselves. There's a lot of talk about shoulds, you know, I should do this or I should do that, and some self-criticism. So self-kindness is really, really important. It's a great place to start, to try to speak to yourself the same way that you would speak to a beloved friend. And then the other part of self-compassion, being common humanity, is a part that I really love. And in workshops, every now and then I'll ask here who has not suffered, and there are no hands that go up. So we are all human beings, and part of the human experience is feeling pain. And going back to Shinzen Young, so the pain times resistance equals suffering. We have all had experience of suffering, right? So we are all in this together. We are all human beings just trying to do the best we can. And I think self-compassion is really important, to take those moments to notice if you're suffering. So these are some examples Krista Neff and Christopher Germer talk about: short self-compassion breaks, things that you could say to yourself when you notice that you're suffering, and ways to be kind to yourself. And just for one short final practice, I would ask if you could take both hands and place them over your heart. Perhaps feeling the warmth of your hands on your chest. Perhaps noticing your heart beating. We know if we leave our hands here for around 20 seconds, there's a release of oxytocin, which is quite nurturing. And if you're willing, saying something to yourself that you might need right now in this moment. So may I be safe. May I be at ease. May I feel peace. Whatever it is that you need, just repeating it in your head several times, allowing it to guide you and nurture you. Treating yourself compassionately by giving yourself what you need right now. And if you feel ready, just allowing your hands to come back down to your lap. And just taking a deep breath in and out. So a final quote by Nelson Mandela: may your choices reflect your hopes and not your fears, which I think in these days is really important to remember, to be hopeful, to not operate from a place of fear. I'm really excited now to hopefully hear some feedback from you, some thoughts that may have come up. So please feel free to ask any questions or share any reflections.
Okay. If anyone has a question? You can see that we have about 15 participants. We also are on Facebook Live. All right. Yeah, there's a question in the chat box. Can you please expand a bit on welcoming everything and push nothing away?
Welcome everything and push nothing away.
Yeah, that's the question is.
Yes. So, yeah, I guess what I could say about welcome everything and push nothing away is it goes back to when I was talking a little bit about emotions, how we tend to like to feel the things that are comfortable and good, and we push away the things that are uncomfortable. So as best we can, if we could begin, and I think sometimes we need to do that cautiously, especially if we're in a period of life that's difficult, if we're, if we're experiencing loss and grief. We don't want to overwhelm ourselves by welcoming everything, but at the same time, allowing a little bit, right? A little bit of allowing things in that may not be easy or comfortable and beginning to approach that with curiosity. So what's here for me? I might be feeling really sad and that's hard. And it'd be easier to, have a couple of glasses of wine or do some online shopping. But maybe I'm just going to sit with that sadness for a little bit and see what that's like. So welcoming the sadness in, as the guest house poem says, right? Allowing each guest to be there, welcoming them all. So it's exactly that, just sitting with things, and knowing that we're strong enough and resilient enough to get through it. I hope that was helpful.
So
Any comments on the practices, the brief mindfulness practices we did? How was that for people, if anybody's willing to share?
all right, I think we're done for today. Yes. Well, thank you very much, Tara.
My
And
pleasure.
thank you very much to all that joined us today on our webinar. And well, just keep follow us on Facebook and also follow our webinar calendar. We are coming with more webinars next week. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
Have a good
everyone.
day.
Yeah, be
Bye-bye
well.
now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.